In 1960, Detroit, Michigan had the highest per capita income of any major city in the United States, 1.85 million people. The arsenal of democracy, the place that put the entire world on wheels. By 2013, it became the largest American city to ever file for bankruptcy. $18 billion in debt. Street lights didn't work. Ambulances took 58 minutes to arrive. 78,000 abandoned buildings rotted in the sun. How does the richest city in the most powerful country on earth just die? This is the story of Detroit. And it's a warning for every American city that thinks it can't happen to them. Detroit didn't just happen to get rich. It was engineered to dominate. In 1903, Henry Ford incorporated the Ford Motor Company on Mack Avenue with $28,000. Within 5 years, the Model T rolled off the line. By 1913, Ford's Highland Park plant introduced the moving assembly line and changed manufacturing forever. What took 12 hours now took 93 minutes. Ford then did something nobody expected. In January 1914, he announced the $5 workday, more than double the average factory wage. Workers flooded into Detroit from everywhere. Appalachian coal country, the Deep South, Poland, Italy, Lebanon. Between 1900 and 1930, Detroit's population exploded from 285,000 to over 1.5 million people. That's a 500% increase in 30 years. General Motors set up headquarters in the city. Chrysler followed. By the 1920s, the big three automakers employed hundreds of thousands of workers directly, and hundreds of thousands more in supplier plants and supporting industries. Detroit wasn't just building cars. It was building the American middle class. There is one rule for the industrialist, and that is, make the best quality of goods possible at the lowest cost possible, paying the highest wages possible. Then came World War II, and Detroit became something beyond a car town. It became the machine that won the war. In 1942, civilian auto production was banned entirely. Every factory converted to military output. Ford's Willow Run plant, a mile-long building covering 67 acres in Ypsilanti, produced one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at peak capacity. By war's end, Detroit's factories had built more military equipment than all of Nazi Germany combined. President Franklin Roosevelt called it the arsenal of democracy. And he wasn't exaggerating. After the war, the soldiers came home. They bought houses. They bought cars. And Detroit delivered. In 1950, the city hit its all-time population peak. 1,849,568 people. General Motors alone employed over 200,000 workers in the metro area. The average auto worker could buy a house, own 2 cars, send his kids to good schools, and retire with a pension. No college degree required. This was the American dream in its purest form. And Detroit was its capital. Watch this carefully. It took Detroit 50 years to build a population of nearly 2 million people. It took 60 years to lose more than 1 million of them. By 2020, the city had fewer residents than it did in 1910. The collapse didn't start with crack cocaine or bankruptcy lawyers. It started with highways. In 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act authorized 41,000 miles of interstate highways across America. For Detroit, this was a death sentence disguised as progress. Suddenly, you didn't need to live in the city to work at the factory. Chrysler's plants in Warren, Ford's campus in Dearborn, GM's tech center in suburban Warren. The jobs moved out, and the people followed. But here's the part nobody likes to talk about. It wasn't just about commute times. Between 1950 and 1970, nearly 350,000 white residents left Detroit for suburbs like Grosse Pointe, Livonia, and Dearborn. Redlining, the practice where banks literally drew red lines around black neighborhoods and refused to issue mortgages there, trapped black families inside the city while subsidized loans helped white families flee to the suburbs. It was engineered segregation. The tax base walked out the door. And nobody replaced it. In 1967, the dam broke. 5 days of civil unrest left 43 people dead, 1,189 injured, and over 2,000 buildings destroyed. The National Guard rolled tanks down Grand River Avenue. Whatever white residents were still on the fence about leaving, they left. Between 1967 and 1980, another 310,000 residents abandoned the city. Factories started closing, storefronts went dark, entire neighborhoods emptied out. The 1970s brought a new enemy, Japan. Toyota, Datsun, and Honda started flooding the American market with smaller, fuel-efficient, cheaper cars. The oil crisis of 1973 made gas prices spike 400%. Suddenly, a Chevy Impala getting 8 miles to the gallon didn't seem like such a great idea. Detroit's automakers were caught flat-footed. Instead of innovating, they lobbied for protection. Instead of building better cars, they cut costs. Quality plummeted. By 1980, Japanese imports captured 28% of the American car market. The Big Three responded with layoffs. Massive layoffs. Between 1978 and 1982, the American auto industry shed over 250,000 jobs. Detroit was hemorrhaging. Then came the crack epidemic. In the mid-1980s, crack cocaine ripped through the city's remaining neighborhoods like a firestorm. Murder rates exploded. In 1987, Detroit recorded 686 homicides. By 1991, the number hit 615, still one of the worst in the nation. Entire blocks turned into open-air drug markets. The people who could afford to leave, left. The people who couldn't, they were trapped. The city's population fell below 1 million for the first time since 1920. Schools deteriorated. The tax base evaporated. Detroit started borrowing money just to keep the lights on. Literally, by the early 2000s, nearly 40% of the city's streetlights didn't work. Detroit is a place where we have seen the American dream come true and the American dream die. The 2008 financial crisis was the knockout punch. In December 2008, General Motors and Chrysler went to Congress begging for bailout money. Both companies eventually filed for bankruptcy in 2009. GM, the company that had once been the largest corporation on planet Earth, needed $49 billion in federal aid to survive. The ripple effects crushed Detroit. Unemployment in the city hit 29%. Home values collapsed by nearly 80% from their peak. You could buy a house in Detroit for less than the price of a used Honda Civic. I'm not being dramatic. Houses were literally selling for $1. By 2013, the city owed $18 billion to more than 100,000 creditors. On July 18, 2013, Detroit's emergency manager Kevin Orr filed for Chapter 9 municipal bankruptcy. It was the largest municipal bankruptcy filing in American history. Think about that. A city that had once been the fourth largest in America, the richest city per capita in the nation, the birthplace of the middle class, was now officially broke. Retirees faced pension cuts of up to 34%. The Detroit Institute of Arts nearly had to sell off masterpieces by Van Gogh, Rembrandt, and Diego Rivera to pay creditors. Services were gutted. The average police response time was 58 minutes. 66% of ambulances were out of service at any given time. Here's the slow-motion collapse of American auto dominance. In 1960, the Big Three owned over 90% of the US car market. By 2010, they held less than 45%. The market share they lost didn't just hurt shareholders. It gutted an entire city. The physical devastation was staggering. At its peak of abandonment, Detroit had roughly 78,000 vacant structures and 66,000 empty lots. The Packard plant, once the most advanced automobile factory in the world when it opened in 1903, a 35-acre complex designed by Albert Kahn, sat abandoned since 1958. 55 years of decay. Floors collapsed. Trees grew through the roof. It became the world's most famous ruin. Michigan Central Station, the 18-story Beaux-Arts train depot that opened in 1913, stood empty since 1988. Its windows blown out. its grand waiting room filled with debris and graffiti. It became the single most photographed symbol of American decline. These weren't just buildings, they were monuments to what was lost. Each abandoned factory represented thousands of paychecks that stopped coming. Each empty house was a family that gave up. The city tried to fight back through demolition. By 2020, Detroit had knocked down over 20,000 blighted structures at a cost of more than $260 million. But for every house they tore down, it felt like 2 more went dark. Detroit emerged from bankruptcy in December 2014. 14 months. The fastest large-scale municipal bankruptcy resolution in American history. Emergency manager Kevin Orr and federal judge Stephen Rhodes brokered what became known as the Grand Bargain, a deal where private foundations, the state of Michigan, and the Detroit Institute of Arts collectively contributed over $800 million to protect retiree pensions while saving the museum's art collection. It was unprecedented. Billionaire Dan Gilbert, founder of Quicken Loans, poured billions into buying and renovating downtown buildings. By 2023, his company Bedrock owned or controlled more than 100 properties encompassing over 18 million square feet of real estate in downtown Detroit. Ford Motor Company purchased Michigan Central Station in 2018 and spent $740 million restoring it into a technology campus that reopened in 2024. The downtown is gleaming again. New restaurants, renovated lofts, tech startups. But let's be honest about what recovery means. Detroit's population in 2020 was 639,111. Down from 1.85 million. The median household income was around $34,000, roughly half the national average. The poverty rate hovered near 33%. The recovery is real, but it's uneven. Downtown sparkles while neighborhoods a mile away still look like the aftermath of a war. This isn't a comeback story yet. It's a survival story. Detroit's not a comeback city. It's a city that never left. So what does Detroit teach us? 4 lessons. Lesson 1. Never depend on a single industry. Detroit put everything on the automobile. When the auto industry sneezed, Detroit got pneumonia. When the auto industry collapsed, Detroit flatlined. Cities that survive, places like Pittsburgh after steel, diversify their economies aggressively. Detroit didn't, and it paid the ultimate price. Lesson 2. Infrastructure decisions have century-long consequences. Those interstate highways built in the 1950s didn't just move traffic. They enabled white flight. They hollowed out the tax base. They physically tore apart neighborhoods. The people who designed those roads never imagined they were designing the death of a city. But they were. Lesson 3. A city's wealth belongs to its people, not its buildings. Detroit had magnificent factories, stunning Art Deco skyscrapers, world-class infrastructure. None of it mattered when the people left. Buildings don't pay taxes. Buildings don't buy groceries. Buildings don't vote. When you lose your people, you lose everything. Lesson 4. Recovery without equity isn't recovery. Pouring billions into a gleaming downtown while neighborhoods a mile away have no streetlights, no grocery stores, and no hope. That's not a comeback. That's a theme park built on a graveyard. True recovery means everyone comes back. Or nobody really does. Detroit was the richest city in America. It built the weapons that won the war. It put the world on wheels. It created the middle class. And then it went bankrupt. Every American city should study what happened here. Because the forces that killed Detroit, single industry dependence, suburban sprawl, racial division, political mismanagement, global competition, they're not unique to Detroit. They're everywhere. The only question is whether we're smart enough to learn the lesson before it's too late.